Well, also, so I have on the phone Jeremy or Zoom, whatever the hell this is. I got Jeremy in a video call to talk a little bit about experimentation maturity. Jeremy, you're someone that I've been following. Your posts are so long, but for all the right reasons, jam-packed with content. Like it's not just short and sweet. You're jam-packing so much content. Every post is calculated and is valuable. I had to have you on the show. And bonus, super congratulations on the partnership you're having with Cinos and the person who I had on the previous show. Anything you want to talk about that?
Oh yeah, we're super excited. We've been keeping it under wraps for a couple of months and working through things, but yeah, I'm so excited about like what the two of us can accomplish together, and like the teams are awesome, and yeah, a lot of big things coming down the pipeline in 2022. So we'll keep everybody updated.
I love it. I'm looking forward to you and him kind of doing big things together. So why don't we just start quick? Jeremy, why don't you talk to people about why should I even be talking to you? What makes you qualified to talk about maturity, experimentation? Just give me a little bit of background about yourself.
Yeah. So technically I've been doing CRO for 14 years now, but from like an agency consulting perspective, I think I'm rolling up on like 10 or 11. So I've focused my whole career on one thing, and that's conversion rate optimization, and specifically helping businesses get started. Because the first 90 days is the hardest. There's just so many pitfalls and roadblocks and issues and bureaucracy. And I just wanted to find like, can we isolate all these issues to the point where people can skip the learning curve and they can like avoid some of the mistakes? So I know we were just talking about like maturity assessment models. Like I have mine that I've used. I stopped counting recently, but like 250 different businesses I've formally walked through a process with their executive teams on like assessing, observing, like analyzing like where their level of maturity is, and then building growth plans for them based on like those inputs.
Yeah.
And I think even in CRO, there's a lot of brilliant people that work in CRO, right? And like everybody kind of has their own niche. It's, I think people misunderstand or misinterpret that a CRO program in year one looks dramatically different than when you're trying to do one-to-one personalization. And I know that's like one of the things we're going to talk about, right? So like it's got CRO, and the way that you approach a program has to be where the current tech stack is and the current team and processes and like competencies and skills. So I don't know, that's a big part of like my mission and what I'm like passionate about working on.
Yeah. And I feel like I could even rename, I know this is from A to B. That's the experiment, that's the show name, but like, I feel like it could even just every episode I'm talking about, like experimentation is just misunderstood. So I talk a lot in my other shows about just experimentation not being well understood. And I think that a lot of times that yields to a limiting factor in the growth of experimentation. And you're kind of bringing up like, it seems like 90 days is almost such a critical point of one, sometimes establishing like the right expectations with leaders, with managers, with whatever, setting processes. But there's also like, in the back of your head, there's not actually a ticking time bomb, but there kind of is a ticking time bomb in that I feel like if you don't do anything in the first 90 days, or you run 10 tests and they all lose and you have nothing to show for it, then people are like, why did I get an experimentation program? I spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on a tool and a person and people to staff, but I have no ROI because it lost after 3 months. Like it's wrong. It's totally wrong thinking. But
Yeah.
what are some things that you've seen like in the first 90 days that are just roadblocks that people are maybe like not focusing on the right things or are putting too much emphasis on the wrong things? What do you think?
Yeah. I'm happy to answer that. Here's like, since I'm such a crazy data nerd, you got to 85. Yeah. Well, you hope everyone is, but so 85 to 115 days is the window when you start hearing the grumblings. But like 90 days is like an arbitrary number we picked, right? Where we're like, hey, we have to show some kind of progress. And it doesn't always have to be like a bunch of winning tests. Sometimes it doesn't even have to be a winning test, but there's got to be like a level of buy-in, engagement, excitement that happens. You have to get that level of traction. And what I've seen so many times that breaks my heart as somebody who does CRO is CRO doesn't work, or CRO doesn't work for us because they just are not putting the things in the right place. So like, with that as the foundation for this, yes, it's the same mistakes over and over and over again. Like when I started doing these maturity assessments, it's like I was looking for the answers. Now it's just like repeatable. It's like, here's all the things that are major problems. So the two biggest categories that I think they fall into that are like the easiest for a novice to like wrap their head around is like, one, we don't know what to test. And two is the operational, like process oriented inefficiencies that prevent teams from getting tests live. And if you can solve those two things, then you have enough of a bandwidth or like a runway to be able to solve all the other stuff. And so, I mean, I don't know if you want to go into like how we solve those problems or like what our perspective is. I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, so we could basically, I think my context of that is like, you're talking about what do you test, which stems into research. Like if you don't have that research, you're not going to know what to test. So that's very clearly, if you're missing research, you're going to run into problems with there. Research could be your limiting factor. What was the second one that you said? Sorry.
And just like getting tests live, essentially.
Right. Which is
Inability,
process. And like
Yeah.
oftentimes, I think there's, again, misconceptions of war. One of the misconceptions is that like, I've hired a CRO, I hired an experimentation person. Therefore, I can run experiments. It's like, no, like there's approvals, there's brand, design, dev, like there is processes involved to get a test out that, I mean, we could geek out on process for like 7 hours. Well, like those two things are so critical. And I think to your point, like there is that you have to have that research from the start. I think that's why with Speero, with our kind of, experimentation programs that we run, we always lead with research first, because there's no point in having a bunch of ideas if they're not backed in research. Otherwise, they're just opinions, which, yeah. So I think that research is critically important. I mean, I love that perspective of just, it's research, which you need to have to get these test ideas, and you need to make sure you have the processes in order to run it properly. Otherwise, you're kind of just like to be blunt, throwing shit at the wall and see what sticks.
Absolutely. That's what most people are doing, unfortunately. But yeah, so the ways we try to circumvent that with teams that don't have maturity is a couple things. Is one, my favorite thing is like, scrape from what you have. There is hidden gold in so many places. And it's like somebody did research and it was on the marketing team 3 years ago and it was never activated, and we forgot it was sitting in a drive somewhere. I mean, like we go through with clients, and I'm sure you guys do like similar things where it's like pull together everything we have, and like just out of that, if there's anything like channel data, existing analytics data, there's like so much stuff you can pull from, like, stakeholder interviews, like there's stuff that's laying around that just hasn't been activated. And if you're really struggling to find a test, just look around and you can find plenty of test hypotheses. The other thing that we do that's kind of a hack is if we have one customer data point, or we have like a couple customer data points that we're pulling together, we try to get the hypotheses and variation count up so they don't get stuck. So like, here's like, we've isolated this pain point, this conversion roadblock. Here's one hypothesis. That's what a normal team does, right? But like in an agency environment like us, we're like, it's not one, it's like, this is 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different, totally different hypotheses. And then 1, 2, 3, 4 different variations for each of those hypotheses. Now we have a huge backlog to draw from. So like we're trying to eliminate these common roadblocks by like, that's a really simple nuance. That's not hard to do, right? Like that's something you could do in an hour meeting, right? It is like, let's create more variations, but it's just simple things like that people aren't aware of that like get them stuck, I think.
Yeah, I think there's also like, there's an assumption that it's like one hypothesis, one outcome, one design. Well, like if you're writing good hypotheses, there are an infinite amount of variations that you could code for and do. So there's almost like this balance of, which is why you always need the help from the, brand UX designers. We have to collaborate with these folks to guide in what is feasible, what makes sense from a design systems perspective, to limit obviously the infinite down to small. But there's always different hacks, like you mentioned there, some other hacks you could like work with designers to figure out what is the easiest, what are design systems components we already have to just plug in that fits and solves for testing the hypothesis. But I think that goes a little bit more into something that I think is not done well, which is like strong hypothesis writing. What do you think about like in the maturity, people often just like, it's hypothesis. It's just a basic if then statement, but it's so much more than that, because it's It's thinking about future state. It's thinking about how you're influencing behaviors and metrics. Like what are things that you've seen maybe like about hypothesis writing or an approach to hypothesis that people just get wrong?
Yeah, that's actually, I love this question. I don't get asked this very often because I usually don't talk to CRO people, but yeah. So I I don't like clients or internal teams getting stuck on the like, we have to write this thing a certain way because it's missing the point, right? The point is like, we're challenging this concept, we're challenging this idea. How do we form this between, a written statement, if you will, and like pulling together something that's pretty complex, copy design, development, QA test setup, right? So like, I try to focus less on like, here's the structure we need. And I try to focus more on like, present an idea in front of multiple people on a team that all have varied skills and backgrounds, challenging that idea, not to kill it, but like, what are other ways that we can think about that? What are other ways we can implement it? So it's almost like workshop style. And like, I do that internally with my team, but then I also model that for clients so their team can step in and support because, you need that varied background. You need those different perspectives. You need like more ideas is always better. And then you can prioritize it down. So that's one of the things we do.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up challenging because I think that's something that I just wrote like a little piece about what is the DNA of an experimentation person. And I think there's a level of like humility. That's a word.
That's the way.
Being humble. I don't know what the conjugation of that word. It's like being a humble person is important because you're not going into tests with preconceived notions. You have a hypothesis, but you're saying, I'm going to look at this objectively. And you talk about challenging. And I love that because that's so core to an experimentation person's mindset. Yeah. You're challenging the norm. You're challenging the data. You're like, I see a 20% lift in conversion rate. Your first thought maybe shouldn't be, great. It should be, what could it be going wrong to cause this to not be accurate? Like, maybe that's a little toxic behavior, but like, you're always thinking about like, what could go wrong to make sure that you're entirely validating the conclusions that you're coming to, challenging the norm. You're running tests to challenge the norm. So I love that keyword of pulling out just challenge. You're a person who challenges, you bring up questions. That's what scientists do. I love that call out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's one point of this, like in my in like the 6 principles of like the books that I've been working on. The 6 is culture of growth. And part of that is there has to be enough radical honesty and there has to be enough tactfulness within a team that you can challenge effectively and you're not hurting people's feelings. You're not being, like rough with feedback and things like that. I feel like I really dug into that because on an agency side, I've run multiple different CRO agency teams that I've like built from scratch. And like, you have to create that dynamic where people feel comfortable, but uncomfortable at the same time, right? You can't be too comfortable, too cocky. Like you can't be too adamant about how you want to implement something. It's gotta be molded, right? So it's like a fine line that you're walking between, like with that concept. It's kind of interesting to see with like high performing optimizers, it's pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, and like you said, there's challenge, but like there's the right way to challenge and there's the wrong way to challenge. I could challenge you by saying, your idea fucking sucks, man. And like that, but like you're not going to solve anything versus like, hey, here's some data that one of the things I always talk about is like, you mentioned about like this personality thing, coming and approaching it from we're here to help you perspective. We're not here to combat you. And oftentimes if you're saying like, if a UI person is coming to you with a design and you test it and it loses, and if it's just calling your baby ugly, which like most normal people would be like, all right, whoa, like I worked hard on this. And that's not the perspective. The perspective is we're here to help. So it's almost taking like, it's a challenge, but also you're doing it with the perspective and mindset of I'm here to help you look as good as you possibly can. That's my job. And I can literally test something to show that your design is so good that it lifted whatever metric by whatever number. I'm helping you get a raise. So like, that's what experimentation is here to do. But to your point, sometimes there is a bit of that personality trait that you can't just come at someone like, you're wrong, your ideas suck. Like you have to approach it from this, like, there's a little bit of that personality, like politicking that you do have to play.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a part of See, I see it. The term that I use is worldview. Like when I hire, like we just hired multiple people to add to the team, like just in the last 30 days. We're growing pretty quickly. And one of the interesting things that you can't teach worldview. You can't teach perspective. You can teach any skills. I can teach anybody like design or analytics or research skills. Like those are all teachable skills, but it's very hard to mold and change someone's worldview. So, I don't know, maybe that's like too esoteric of a nature nurture thing that I'm throwing into the CRO conversation. But I think there's an aspect of that where like, it's, if you select the right people who have that kind of optimization mindset, it just makes things significantly easier. And not everybody has that. So that gets into some of these other roadblocks of like, I talked about in my book, like the two different approaches, like you can get executive buy-in and agreement across the board, or you break things out and you like go find a landing page that everybody forgot about and you start building some momentum, right? So like there's two paths you get to choose from, right? And then like all of these parts are tied together. You can't pull them apart really, but you can like analyze them separately.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things about like experimentation maturity as I'm working on this product is like there's a little bit of delineation that you have to make. So like pulling out, let's say, a prioritization framework, or actually let's go research. Research is so important to so many things, but just because you have a tool for research doesn't mean you're good at research. You have to have people who are good at it to support it. Then you have to have the processes in place to make sure that research feeds into it. So there is a little bit of delineation to understand where the gaps are, but this whole thing is just this one big massive connective tissue. There's no silos that happen here, which it was just like an interesting thing as I was going through this product of like delineate it. And I'm like, I did, but like, it's not as clean as just a single sliver. They are all so interconnected with each other.
Yeah. You're right. That's, it's really hard. I tinkered for a while. Like I expanded the scope of the factors. So like my framework is 33 factors and that's not arbitrary. It's like I tinkered with it for a long time with a lot of people and I showed it to a lot of people and I like had presentations and got called out on clients where they're like, you forgot this thing. And it's like, well, let's go in the next step. So, we basically boiled it down to like, it's a manageable amount of things that, like you're saying, you're delineating and you're measuring and ranking. It's not too overwhelming, but it's not too simplified either because you can leave out really important, points. So like we're basing that on like, here's 6 principles and there's a couple things within each of those. And that gives us a good enough idea that we can ping somebody and be like, okay, now we know the exact inputs and we're going to create a customized solution for how you need to approach this based on where you are today. And I think that's the cool thing is like, because the success rate increases exponentially when you give somebody a customized plan that like fits their team, right? It's just like night and day difference. It's wild actually to like see it in action and like get to observe that. And it's also super fulfilling, because like, because guys like us, we want to see companies succeed, right? So like whatever we can do to make that happen, is just super fulfilling.
Yeah. I mean, on the theme about like a customized plan, that's a pretty good segue into the next topic I wanted to talk to you about, which is personalization. This is something that I struggled with a lot. I think my view of personalization is it's a tool in the toolbox of experimentation, which is a tool in the toolbox of research. So that's kind of how I view it hierarchically. I think that's not the right or wrong way to do it. I just think that's one way of approaching it. But I think a lot of times, like, I swear to God, I heard someone one time say this, that personalization should replace experimentation. And I was like, no, they are hand in hand. Personalization should support experimentation, but you shouldn't entirely like scrap experimentation to just like reskin your site to be a personalized experience. Also, you should test your personalization. But like, talk to me a little bit about like how you view the relationship between personalization, experimentation, and using these two means to achieve better overall experimentation maturity.
Yeah, that's a hot button one. Do you want to talk about 7 hours of unpacking something? So, I'll say, without getting into the naming wars, which I've always tried not to participate in to the best of my ability, but like my umbrella is I've always used the term CRO because I've just used it for so long that I just say that now. So like that's the baseline, right? Everything feeds into that general concept of digital growth or whatever the heck you want to call it. Like I don't call it growth hacking either or whatever, but
No one should call it that.
yeah. So but I think, yeah, there's a concept of like, what are the tools in the toolbox? But my view of personalization, again, whether it's right or wrong, is it's a level of sophistication. Like if you try to start with one-to-one personalization, there's like 100% failure rate because your team doesn't have the skills or the technology or I mean, now at least we have really cool technology. Like 15 years ago, we didn't have anything cool. Like you couldn't even build landing pages without hard coding them yourself, you know? So like the industry has advanced on the technology side. I have not personally seen the same level of sophistication and advancement on the team and process side. So the way that I view it is it's a level of like progression. It's a level of increasing maturity or sophistication. So if you can't have a high functioning A/B testing program, to call it that, then like, how are we going to get more sophisticated with analytics and like tying together and integrating discrete data sources? Like you're not going to be able to do that if you don't have the chops to do it. So, it's kind of both. I mean, it's a toolbox, just like quantitative and qualitative research are a toolbox, and like customer interview, you know, like they're all tools, but I think there's like this blending concept of the sophistication part that I think is super important.
Yeah, I like that. And then my last kind of question thought thing I wanted to probe with you on is this topic of research. So I'm going to be a contrarian. I read one of your posts recently and you kind of mentioned something about when you want, let me try to get the exact quote. Crows. I'm not going to use crows. That's the wrong word. CRO. Anyone who says crow, you're wrong.
Oh, yeah, I don't say that. Yeah.
Not a bird. CROs who love to talk about conducting research. I'm sorry. Your exact quote is CROs love to talk about conducting research, but the reality is nothing happens until you launch a test. And that stood out to me a little bit because at first, I think this, in the whole spirit of your post, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, if you remember it, was
I do. Yes.
Experimentation and research are two, like, it's like a cycle that they need to feed into each other, and they both need to be working process-wise, absolutely in conjunction with each other. Because if all you do is run experiments, you're gonna, I use some math, like experimentation is say +2 to your organization. Research is +7. Both of them together is like +25. But if you add them together, like they have to work together and they both synergize and harmonize to lift you up entirely. So I think that's kind of the theme of your post, right?
Yeah. My analogy is two sides of the coin. That's what like seems to resonate when I'm like speaking or like talking to clients and stuff. And they're like, oh, I never thought about it like that.
Yeah.
And we have plenty of math and data to support the idea that like your validated win rate goes up dramatically when you add customer data and research methods. And we've seen it because we've modeled this across so many different businesses, right? We can go and pull all the, I go and pull all their data and I literally database it and I have everybody's stuff. so I know. But the other part of it too is like, if we're talking just about the aspect of like in your first year of CRO, we do what I call a dual track approach. So like, I know that like what you don't want to do is like sit and do research for 6 months. I'm exaggerating for effect and like not launch any tests, right? Because there's like hard cost to that and you're not going to be able to show the ROI and then you're going to have all kinds of like buy-in issues. So we're literally like, how quickly can we get tests live? So we have shots on goal. How do we scrape from what we have to make sure that we're getting as data driven as we can from day one, even though nothing exists and there's no process of structure. And then they're in parallel tracks essentially, and they continue in those parallel tracks. And I think when I explain it to like clients and CMOs, those things seem to resonate because they're such clear examples of what we're trying to get them to do when it's kind of a complex topic.
Yeah. I love that. And I knew that was kind of the theme of your post, but I wanted to push you on that because I think there is such or more just like a soapbox for me to get on to talk about how important it is that experimentation and research are so intertwined and laid together. Like I've made such good friends because I just developed such deep relationships with the UX people because I'm sitting there talking to them like every other day about a test win from another brand or something else. And we're just constantly in contact because that's that relationship. That's what it should be. Like you mentioned, like if you're not running an experiment based in research, like what are you doing? You're running, you're running opinionated things that I think you're saying like your success rate is going to be so high with research and experimentation. I almost just see it the other way. You should probably lose a lot of your tests because you're not backing it up in data. So I'm seeing that like glass half empty. It's like you're just doing it absolutely wrong if you're not including any kind of data in your experimentation or your hypothesis.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Totally agree. And I think, I mean, I don't know if you want to talk about this more, but the best example within a business that is siloed, you know, like the $60 million startup that's not really a startup anymore, but calls itself a startup. Like that's what a lot of my clients like fit into that category where they have siloed and all of these teams don't talk to each other. And one of the reasons that people hire me specifically is because you're getting like an executive level person who can come in and rein these teams together. And the product team is like, let's test a bunch of stuff. You know what I mean? Because they have the technical chops to do it. The UX team over here, research team is like, hey, nobody's paying attention to us. We have all this cool stuff and nobody's doing anything with it. So yeah, I think, I mean, again, back to like the roadblocks, like different sizes of revenue and different team sizes and different maturity, like you have to custom fit what works for them. But yeah, you got to pull those parts together or it just does, or it underperforms. And we've just like proven that. So
yeah. I mean, it's this whole break the silos, collaboration. And in order to collaborate, like we talked about a couple minutes ago, like you have to have that personality trait to want to talk to other people and have that communication style that you're not just like, give me my test, give me my dev, give me my whatever. Like you're building these two-way streets. You're building this, an experimentation can and should be this connective tissue that just should hopefully just link everything all together. And man, we could geek out on this probably for another 2 hours if we wanted to, but I got to cut it short. Jeremy, thank you so much for hopping on, taking this time. I definitely think we're going to do a round 2 of this in the coming future. Any stuff you want to plug? Anything else you want to kind of talk about here?
No. I mean, if people want to like check out my stuff, like you mentioned the LinkedIn post, I literally post like action-packed stuff every day. I like squeezing into 3,000 characters as much as I can. So that's just my style. You know what I mean? Of like trying to provide value. So like, I would say like if somebody wants to find me, they can go on LinkedIn and that's the easiest way to like see content or ask me questions or different things like that. I always am happy to help because I'm super passionate about this in the industry.
Yep. You're easily a top follow for any person who's in experimentation. Jeremy, thank you so much for taking the time. I really do appreciate it.
Great, man. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.